Okay, this is a quiz called Grade 8 Reach Back the Big Three Algebra, Integers, and Fractions, and we will be doing this once a week for the remainder of the next 2 to 3 months. Every week we will be doing a reach back for integers, fractions, and algebra to ensure that you will eventually all be containing 100% of the questions, or they're close to that. So the first question on our first 10 questions are all integer questions. And the first question says, what is negative 10 plus 4? Now, negative 10 plus 4, if I was to draw it, there's 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 negatives plus 4 positives. And what you learn to do is you learn to think about that idea, and your answer is negative 6. Okay, everybody got that right. Question 2, you're asked to combine a negative 2 take away a negative 9. And you could think of it as being negative 2 take away negative 9. If I have negative 2 and I have to take away negative 9 from it, well, I can't do it, so I take this 0 pair and I infinite clone it. And I bring, that's negative 2, that's still negative 2, that's negative 2, that's still negative 2, that's negative 2, that's negative 2. So right here, this whole thing is still negative 2. And if I was to take away 9 negatives, I would end up with a positive 7. So that is one way to do it, to get the answer of positive 7. The easier way to do it was to keep your first integer, use addition, and use the opposite of the second integer. So instead of using negative 2 take away negative 9, you could do negative 2 plus its opposite, which is positive 9, and you would get positive 7 as an answer. Question 3 is the multiplication of a positive and negative. Positive 6 times negative 2. Well, 6 times 2 is 12. And the rule is if they're opposite signs, it's negative. If they're same signs, it's positive. So a positive times negative will be a negative 12. Next question, 10 divided by 10 is 1, not 0. And the negative divided by negative is a positive, so your answer is positive 1. 4 plus 2 times negative 10. Remember, if there is a number next to another number in brackets, that actually means multiplication. So this is the exact same question if I wanted to write it out like that. Now, following BEDMAS, we would have to do multiplication first, which means it's 4 plus negative 20 in brackets, which means the answer is negative 16. Next question. Uh-oh. Only 57% of the people got it right. This is the same thing as 1 take away 4 times negative 3. And take away is not done first, but multiplication is. What is, if I put it in highlighter, what is 4 times negative 3? Because this is a subtraction sign, which comes down with it, because that's your next operation. What is 4 times negative 3? It's negative 12. And 1 take away negative 12 requires adding the opposite, which would be 1 plus positive 12, which is a 13. Did I make a mistake? Huh. Oops, I copied down the question wrong. It's not a negative 3, it's a positive 3. Oopsie daisy. Let's do this again. Try again. So it's 1 take away 4 times 3, which is 12. Keep flip change, you're going to get negative 11. Negative 11 is your answer. Next question. It says negative 8 plus 30 divided by negative 2 take away negative 1. So obviously in this question we have more than one operation. And when we have more than one operation, we need to follow BEDMAS. So the first thing we're going to do is 30 divided by negative 2. Now notice how negative 8 stays there, and take away negative 1 stays here. And 30 divided by negative 2 is a negative 15, so I'm going to put the negative 15 there. Everything else just came down. Now we have addition and subtraction, and we'll do it in the order that it appears from left to right. A negative 8 combined with 15 more negatives is 23 negatives. And now we have negative 23 take away a negative 1. Add the opposite will get us the same answer to subtracting the same. So negative 23 plus positive 1 is negative 22. Your next question is negative 2 multiplied by 4 take away 8. Take away 3 multiplied by negative 2. So the first thing I do is my brackets. So negative 2 multiplied by negative 4. Take away 3 times negative 2. I got multiplication, so I'll do them both at the same time. Negative 2 times negative 4 is 8. Take away 3 times negative 2, which is negative 6. Keep flip change or add the opposite, you get 14 as an answer. Your next question says 6 times 4 plus 3 times negative 2 divided by negative 2. Well, 6 times 4 is 24 plus negative 6 divided by negative 2, which is a positive 18 divided by negative 2, which is a final answer of negative 9. And your last integer question, number 10, says 10 take away 11. So these brackets here mean do this first. So 10 take away 11 is negative 1. Negative 1 take away 15 is negative 16. And negative 16 plus a negative 2 is negative 18. So when I work out the brackets, all of that will become negative 18. And now I'll take that number, negative 18, and divide it by negative 2. And I'll get a positive 9. Now we get into our algebra, which we just finished not too long ago. So we get negative 2x equals 6. So the opposite operation is to divide both sides by negative 2. And your work and my work should be identical. And x should equal a positive 3. Question 12, 10 plus x equals negative 1. So if I was to draw it, it would be 10 integer chips and an x is equal to negative 1. So the constant is a positive 10. So in order to get rid of that, I am going to place negative 10 on both sides, which is going to get rid of my constant, and which is going to create 11 negatives here. And I'm going to get x is equal to negative 11. Or if I do it over here, I'm going to subtract 10 from both sides and get x equals negative 11. Now in my next question, it's actually a two-step algebraic equation. This is a positive 4 and a negative x equals negative 10. And I'm going to get rid of the negative 4 first by putting a negative 4, or positive 4 by putting negative 4 on both sides, or subtracting 4 from both sides. Now when I do so, I still have a negative x equals negative 14. And remember, a negative x is the same thing as a negative 1x, which means in order to get rid of this negative sign, I'm going to have to divide both sides by the coefficient, which is negative 1. And that's going to give me x is equal to positive 14. X minus 1 equals negative 4. I'm going to add 1 to both sides, and x is going to equal negative 3. My next question, it says a negative 10th of x, so I'm going to multiply both sides by negative 10 to get rid of the divide by negative 10. Those are opposite operations. When I multiply that side by negative 10, I get x. When I multiply this side by negative 10, I get a positive 20. Now this one had tended to have a lot more mistakes. If it's a 2 constant, the first thing I do is get rid of my constant by subtracting 2 from both sides. After I do that, I have a negative 4x. It's equal to a negative 12. Since my coefficient is negative 4, and I can highlight that for you, my coefficient is negative 4, I'm going to divide both sides by negative 4 to get x equals positive 3. Our next question, the constant's negative 1, so I'm going to add 1 to both sides to get rid of the constant. I'm left with a negative quarter of x is equal to negative 4. And then finally I'm going to multiply both sides by negative 4 to get rid of that. Multiply this side by negative 4, and x will equal a positive 16. Question 18, my constant is a positive 8, so I'm going to subtract 8 to get rid of it. When I subtract 8 from both sides, I get negative 10x, same as the last question, equals negative 28. I'm then going to divide both sides by negative 10 to get rid of the coefficient. I got x And some people needed a calculator here, but you don't really need a calculator because when you divide by 10, you move the decimal. So if it was 38 divided by 10, you move the decimal one place over here to get 3.8. And if it's 28 divided by 10, you get 2 decimal 8, and a negative divided by a negative is a positive, so your answer is x equals 2 decimal 8. Now the next question, a lot of people forgot what to do. So if I was to draw this, this is a negative 1 plus an x right here. Right here. That's what that is right there. And this 4 outside the brackets means I have 4 of them, or multiply that amount by 4. So I'm going to take it, and I'm going to multiply it by 4. Equals negative 20. So when I expand this, I have to use what's called distributive property, and I have 4 negative 1s, which is negative 4, and I have 4 x's, which is positive 4x, equals negative 20. That's called expanding using distributive property. And when I do that, I'm going to get rid of my constant first by adding 4. 4x equals negative 16. And finally, divide both sides by the coefficient, and x will equal negative 4. And our last algebra question, distributive property again. This time it's a little bit more complicated because this time I have, instead of saying 2 groups of x minus 7, I have negative 2 groups of x minus 7. But negative 2 times x is negative 2x. And a negative 2 times a negative 7 is a positive 14, not a negative 14. So a lot of you might have made a mistake right there. We have a negative 14, but it's a positive 14. Equals 12. First step is to subtract 14 from both sides. Negative 2x equals negative 2. And divide both sides by negative 2, and x will equal a positive 1. And finally, your fraction questions, which I think are easy, but some people find it a little bit more complicated. When you have 2 fractions and you're adding them together, you need to find the first multiple both of them share. And the first multiple these 2 numbers share is 12, which means if I was to add them together, I need to use 12 as a common denominator. Once I have that, I need to make equivalent fractions. So 1/4 is equal to how many twelfths? The answer is 3/12 and 1/4 are equivalent fractions, so we're going to write that as 3/12 instead. And 2/3 is equal to how many twelfths? The answer is 8/12, so we're going to put 8 there. And finally, we're going to add the numerators and keep your denominator, and your final answer is 11/12. Next question is subtraction. Common denominator will be 10. 8/10 take away 1/10 is 7/10. Question 23. Now when you have mixed fractions and you're doing subtraction, the easiest thing to do is first start by changing the mixed fractions to improper, and then using the exact same method you would if they were proper fractions by finding a common denominator, creating equivalent fractions, subtracting the numerators, and keeping the denominator to give you 23/40. When adding, you can simply take your whole numbers and add them together, take your fractional parts and add them together, and then at the end combine them. So this is going to be 3 for the whole numbers. Now the first multiple the 10 and 4 share, if I was to write them out, is 20. So 20 is your lowest common denominator. You could use 40 because it is a common one, but it's not the lowest. So we use 20 as the lowest. Those will be 2/20. This will be 15/20, which means your final answer is 3 and 17/20. When multiplying fractions by a whole number, you can think of your whole number as being 4/1. That's the same thing as 4. Once you have that, you can multiply your numerators and multiply your denominators You get 8 over 5, which is the same thing as 1 3/5. Your next question is 2/5 divided by 3. So again, it's 2/5 divided by 3 over 1. And when we would divide fractions, we know that we keep the first fraction, change to multiplication, and use the reciprocal of the second fraction. So instead of having 2/5 divided by 3, we can get the same answer by doing 2/5 multiplied by the reciprocal, which means our final answer is 2/15. The next question is pretty easy, especially if you acknowledge that this is a multiplication question, and when multiplying fractions, you can always cross-reduce before you multiply. So 4 over 4 will reduce down to 1 over 1, and therefore 3 times 1 and 1 times 11 will give you a final answer of 3/11. Now, if you didn't cross-reduce, you ended up with 12/44, which must be reduced to lowest terms by dividing by common multiples. But eventually, you got down to 3/11. Question 28 is the multiplication of mixed fractions, and the easiest way to do that is through conversion to improper. Once you have that, check for cross reduction. Oh, I made a mistake there, didn't I? No, that's right. So nothing can be reduced. So you're going to multiply the numerators, you're going to multiply the denominators, and you're going to get 57 over 16, which is equal to 3. That's 48. And 9/16 is the final answer. Question 29 is division, so the same thing. Convert your mixed fractions to improper. Change to multiplication and use the reciprocal of the second. Now here, since we're multiplying, we can cross-reduce to 4 over 1, which gives us 12 over 19 as a final answer. And your last question is a BEDMAS question. So the first thing I'm going to do, according to BEDMAS, is my multiplication. So 1.5 times 1 3/4, or right here, this part right here, is the same thing as 3 over 2 multiplied by 7 over 3. If you cross-reduce, that would be lovely, because you'll end up with 7 over 2 as a final answer. And I'm just going to leave it as 7 over 2, or 21 over 6. It really doesn't matter. But 4 over 5 plus 7 over 2, your common denominator will be 10. That's 8 over 10 plus 35 over 10 will be 43/10. Did I make a mistake? I did, didn't I? Oops, I made a mistake. It's supposed to be 3 over 2 multiplied by 7 over 4, not 7 over 3. And therefore, it has to be 21 over 8, and it has to stay like that. So then it's 4 over 5 plus 21 over 8. My mistake. Common denominator will be 40. That'll be 32/40 plus 105/40 is 137/40, which is 3 17/40.